بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Nur al-Idah, we began in the first part of lesson 1 at looking at the author's introduction. And one of the characteristics that the author mentions about his text is that he has chosen the sound opinions of the school. The sound opinions of the school. So that's where we reached. Now this leads to just something that helps a student of knowledge navigate that what are the opinions of the school, right? Because at one level, we follow what the relied upon position of the school is, and we accept the relied upon position of the school from the relied upon texts of the school, logically. However, it helps to know why is there the nuance and so on about the school. So the Hanafi school is called Madhab al-Imam Abi Hanifa, the school of Abu Hanifa, because it is Imam Abu Hanifa's position that is the basis of the school. It is Imam Abu Hanifa who laid down an interpretive method that he inherited from his teachers, right? Like Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, who took from the students of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who took from the students of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who was of the closest of the students of the beloved Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أعلم الصحابة بعد الخلفاء. The most learned of the companions after the Khulafa al-Rashidin was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So the opinions of Imam Abu Hanifa, so Imam Abu Hanifa had a distinctive method of interpretation of the primary text. That is what a mujtahid comes with, right? A mujtahid is someone who has the capacity to derive specific rulings from the primary evidence, right? How do they derive specific rulings from primary evidence? Through an interpretive method, a consistent interpretive method. That's what makes a mujtahid. So a mujtahid has an interpretive method and a body of legal interpretations. Right? So what is the madhab? The madhab is a system of legal interpretations, and the derivative interpretations. And these madhabs survived because their legal method was sound and coherent. In terms of the principles of interpretation, but also the coherence of the derivative, the coherence and consistency of the derivative interpretations, the actual legal opinions. Very distinctively in the Hanafi school, we have not only Imam Abu Hanifa as Imam of the school, but we also have we have a number of his great students, each of whom is a mujtahid imam on their own level. That being Abu Yusuf and Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, who are both at the level of absolute ijtihad, but they ascribe themselves in their interpretive method to Imam Abu Hanifa. So the Hanafi madhab is the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa, but his two students being at the level of ijtihad themselves, they generally followed the legal method of their teacher, but there are some issues in legal method and many issues of derivative nuances of legal method and many derivative opinions, possibly up to between 20 to 30% of opinions, they did not agree with their teacher. And he, as we saw in the way of teaching of Imam Abu Hanifa in a class that we covered called the Hanafi way, you can find it on our YouTube channel and it'll be available as an on-demand course as well. You can access it through a number of the Usul al-Fiqh classes. There is, Imam Abu Hanifa fostered a diversity of opinions as well, because when issues would arise, he would ask the students, what do you have to say about this? And of course, the students being scholars at various levels of legal acumen, right? So he'd start with the outer circle of students, then the middle circle, then the inner circle of students, right? So he'd let the more junior ulama amongst the students give their opinions, then the more senior ones, then the most senior ones. Generally, the main opinions that would survive would be those of Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. Generally, Abu Hanifa would give the final word, which is why, it is not just because it's his madhab that his opinion is generally taken, right? And sometimes Imam Abu Hanifa would comment more than once on an issue, which is why sometimes you have multiple narrations about an issue from Imam Abu Hanifa. But the primary opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa is that which is mentioned in what is called Zahir al-Riwaya. Zahir al-Riwaya are the main writings, main legal writings of Imam Abu Hanifa. Right? The main legal writings, of Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. Right? The main writings of Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. In these, Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, Imam Muhammad, he would narrate the position of Abu Hanifa, also the position of Abu Yusuf, and his opinion when they differed. And there's half a dozen of these books. And these are called Zahir al-Riwaya because these Imam Muhammad al-Hasan taught extensively, and they're mass transmitted from Imam Muhammad, Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. So this serves as the backbone of the madhab, right? The foundation of the school. And however, these were written, right? They were gathered through transmission. They're gathered early. The core focus there was to lay out the issues. They're written by a mujtahid addressing senior students of his own, right? So they're written at a very high level. The ulama who came after sifted through these and tried to structure them and understand what are the core issues of the madhab. And this, in a very simplified manner, is what is transmitted in the mutun of the madhab, right? The primers of the madhab, right? And this is the foundational purpose of what are called the four primary mutun, the four main primers of the madhab, right? Mukhtasar al-Quduri, and of Imam al-Quduri, the Mukhtar of Imam al-Mawsili, the Matn al-Wiqaya, and Kanz al-Daqa'iq of Imam al-Nasafi. These four are the core mutun, the core primers of the madhab. some of them, particularly the Kens, have a considerable number of issues beyond just the transmission of the madhab, of the details filled in by the scholars after, but their core purpose is exactly that, the transmission of the madhab. So the basis is that because the heart of the madhab is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, that if something is what is transmitted in Zahir al-Riwayah, the basis is that that would be the madhab, because the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa, right? But sometimes there would be nuances to this. There would be nuances, because the scholars would sometimes differ on what is in fact the main transmission from Imam Abu Hanifa, because sometimes issues have interpenetrating considerations. So people would differ in understanding what is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, for example. Or there could be other considerations where something may theoretically, this may be the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, but due to contingent considerations such as difficulty, hardship, need, ease, customary practice being to the contrary, the scholars who would come after might not take the position of Abu Hanifa, or they may verify that the position of Abu Hanifa is otherwise, which is why, though the basis of the madhab is what is in the mutun, the primers of the madhab, is given precedence, but the major commentaries of the school, if they explicitly choose another opinion, either that this is more soundly established from Imam Abu Hanifa, or that this is what the fatwa is upon due to contingent considerations, right? Such as those I just mentioned, difficulty, hardship, the need for ease, changing custom, etc. They may state that the fatwa is on another opinion. But then thirdly, there are scholars throughout the centuries who came, who can be called the ulama al-tarjih, of the scholars of verification, that often there'd be multiple opinions that would arise as to what is the strongest opinion in the Hanafi school. So these scholars would weigh the strength of the various opinions within the school to relate what is the fatwa position, right? And these are called the ulama al-tarjih, the ulama of verification. And then broadly, why would we leave the position of Imam Abu Hanifa? This is one of the critical issues, and we'll see many examples of this within the text itself. And basically, the ulama tell us that when is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa left? Firstly, we take a governing principle. This is the school of Imam Abu Hanifa. It follows the interpretive method of Imam Abu Hanifa. No prizes, no surprises about that, right? However, so that's the basis, right? The basis of the school is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. However, the ulama tell us that there are three principal reasons why the position of Imam Abu Hanifa might be left. Right? And these are summarized very well by Ibn Nujaym, Az-Zayn Ibn Nujaym, the author of Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq, which is one of the great works of the Hanafi school. Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq, which is a commentary on one of the largest works written on Kanz al-Daqa'iq of Imam An-Nasafi. So it may be left for one of three opinions. The first being the strength of evidence. The strength of evidence that the opinion of Muhammad ibn al-Hasan or Abu Yusuf might be stronger in evidence. However, this is only accepted if the one deeming that one of the position of Abu Yusuf, Muhammad al-Hasan, is stronger in evidence, if they themselves are a mujtahid within the school. Right? And if their judgment accords with the principles of the school. Because there are some of the great early Hanafi mujtahids who, like Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, they had some of their own derivative legal method, where being at the level of ijtihad, they varied from Imam Abu Hanifa on that. And examples of that include, for example, just to mention one name, Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi. To mention a second name, cheating, is Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Karhi. They're both 3rd and 4th century scholars who, Imam al-Tahawi, the author of the famous Aqidah, but he was above all a great Hanafi jurist and an Imam in Hadith. He has some choices. So this is if it accords with the principles of the school, right? And we don't need to go into the details of that. Secondly, an opinion may be chosen leaving the position of Imam Abu Hanifa due to recognized need, such as there being hardship, right? Such as there being hardship in applying the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, or the need for ease. To give one example, according to Imam Abu Hanifa himself, a large body of water would be that which the onlooker would consider a large body of water. Now, do you hang out with bodies of water much? So if you came by like a pool of water and there's some filth in one side, would you have some criteria of judging, is this a large body of water or a small body of water? No. Now, even if you knew that Imam Abu Hanifa held that a large body of water is that if filth fell on one side, its effects wouldn't reach the other side. Would you be able to judge that if you pass by a body of water? No. Right? So now if suddenly you took on being a shepherd and you passed by bodies of water, that will put you in hardship, because we don't deal with bodies of water all the time. So they left the position of Imam Abu Hanifa technically for a position transmitted from Muhammad al-Hasan about the issue of 10 by 10. Taysiran, out of facilitation. This is considered need. The third reason that the position of Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, may be left is when customary practice is contrary to it. Right? And that, because a lot of fiqh is based on contingent considerations. And this appears a lot more outside the chapters of worship, but even in some of the chapters of worship, it comes up. To give one example from outside the chapters of worship, Imam Abu Hanifa, in his time, held that if you bought a house, you only had to see the inner courtyard, right? So houses were built, what's called a dar. There's an inner courtyard and there's rooms around it. You didn't have to see the rooms. If you've seen the courtyard, then you have no option of inspection left after that. You can't say, no, this house wasn't as described, unless there's defects. Why? Because his opinion there is based on the custom during his time, that houses weren't lavish and you could tell by the courtyard how the rooms would be. And that's all. But his fourth most important student, Imam Zufar, disagreed. He said, no, you have to inspect the rooms as well. It's not enough to inspect the courtyard. And that's because the custom had changed. Now the rooms tended to differ. And this comes up on many issues, or even if a later custom changed. So, and we don't want to go into too many examples, but we'll cite one more example. The transmitted position of Imam Abu Hanifa is that there's no riba in base currency, in like fulus, in like copper and brass coins. But why? Because people wouldn't buy and sell through, you'd only use fulus, the base currency, for like loose change, right? That imagine like 10 years ago when we still had pennies around, would you buy significant things through pennies? No, right? It was just not done. Like which shopkeeper would say, yeah, can you cite me the price in pennies? Have you ever had a transaction of more than $1 where the price was cited in pennies? Pennies or cents? We have cents here, right? What do we have in Canada? Cents. Yeah. Sorry, I haven't used paper money for years, let alone coins. I don't carry a wallet. I haven't carried it for years. I have a wallet somewhere, but then in the 8th, 9th century, due to many world events, especially in some parts of the Muslim world, transactions in fulus became a lot more prevalent. So the scholars at that time took the position of Muhammad ibn al-Hasan to be the fatwa position, that given the change in custom and given the shari'i implications, the fatwa is that there is riba in fulus. Right? So customary practice has many implications. However, there are conditions for customary practice. Right? That the custom has to be sound, so it doesn't go against the principles of the Sharia, and it has to be prevalent. So it's not just the custom that, so let's say if Ustadha Yusr and Sister Iman Sister Iman buys cakes from Ustadha Yusr. So each time, whenever a sale takes place, she pays some days later. So no, our custom is that I pay you in 3 days. No, that's not custom. Custom has to be prevalent, has to be sound, and number 2, prevalent, either in that industry or that land or in general. Right? So there are conditions for sound custom. So that's when Imam Abu Hanifa's position may be left. But just because something is mentioned in a fiqh book that the fatwa in our times is on this, their times are not our times necessarily. Because the contingent considerations may change. The contingent considerations may change. Okay, so then the question arises that what are the sources for relied upon positions? Right, just to summarize this discussion, one is that the core issues of the school are taken from the core mutun, the core primers of the school. Right? Secondly, we take the relied upon positions from the major commentaries of the school. The most significant of these are the commentaries on the Hidayah. The commentaries on the Hidayah of Imam al-Marghinani. Right? And the Hidayah of Imam al-Marghinani is itself a commentary. However, the ulama have treated it as though it's a matan. It's such a significant work. And it's not a small work. It's over 1,000 pages, right? Frequently published in 4 volumes. So of course, in the Indian subcontinent, they called it al-awwalain wal-akhirain. Right? The first two volumes, because they study those. And in some madaris, some systems, they do it in 2 years. Some will do it in 4 years, the hidayah. But, they call al-awwalain the first two volumes, and the al-akhirain the second two volumes. But then they would often refer to the hidayah in praise as hidayatul awwalina wal akhirin, the guidance for the first people and the last people. And the hidayah is a marvel. The hidayah is a marvel. But the hidayah, Imam al-Marghinani, who died late in the 6th Islamic century, he took the Mukhtasar of Imam al-Quduri, and then he looked in one of the most important of the books of Zahir al-Riwayah, Al-Jami' al-Saghir of Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, and he joined between the two in a primer called Al-Bidayah. But it was more of a cut and paste job, right? The matan. So matan itself wasn't given that much attention, partly because of the brilliance of the commentary. The matan basically is Quduri plus issues from Al-Jami' al-Saghir. But the commentary is brilliant. Now, a 1,000-page book is large, but not that large. But he spent 12 years compiling this book. So it is one of the most refined presentations, not only of the legal opinions of the school, but its legal reasoning, the difference of opinion within the school between Abu Hanifa and his two students, and the difference with Imam al-Shafi'i and the response to the Shafi'i position, and key derivative issues, right? Which is why most curricula of core studies would finish their studies with the study of the Hidayah before people would go to specialize in fiqh, in specialization programs. So the Hidayah was very significant, and much after the Hidayah, a lot of the core effort of the school went in commenting upon the Hidayah. Amongst the works that commented on the Hidayah, we'll just mention 4, just to be brief, because these are very important works, and you'll hear of them. One is the inayah of, and inshallah the students from Toronto, they'll give you a listing of these books, inshallah. So as part of a recommended resource, the first is al-inayah of Imam Akmaluddin al-Babarti. Akmaluddin al-Babarti. It's called al-inayah, commentary on the Hidayah. Second is Al-Binaya. Al-Binaya, they're all Sharh al-Hidayah. Al-Binaya of Imam Badruddin al-Aini. Imam al-Aini is the great Hanafi commentator on Sahih al-Bukhari. And it's an encyclopedia. His commentary on the Hidayah is an encyclopedic commentary, goes in at length both into the evidences of the school and its details. The third is Fathul Qadir of Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam. Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam, Fathul Qadir. And Fathul Qadir is Fakhrul Madhab, right? After the Hidayah, right? Arguably the greatest work written in the Hanafi Madhab post Hidayah is Fathul Qadir. And the fourth work is by Fakhrul Hind, right? The great pride of India of the last 2 centuries, Imam Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi. Imam Abdul Hayy al-Lakhnawi, who died at the age of 39 in the year 1305 or 1306 after the Hijrah. He only had one teacher, his father, Maulana Abdul Halim al-Lakhnawi. But it doesn't hurt if your one teacher is an imam, even if they're your own father. He had someone who taught him Urdu and Farsi and mathematics and stuff when he was a child. But he was brilliant. He authored over 126 books, about 90 of them in Arabic, which is not his mother tongue. He only left India twice, both times, to go on pilgrimage. He spent a little bit of time in the Hijaz, where he took the asanid of Ahl al-Hijaz in Hadith, also took Dala'il al-Khairat from Shaykh al-Dala'il in the Hijaz, etc. Imam Abdul Hayy, Imam Abdul Halim al-Laknawi, he authored a hashia on the Hidayah. Right? Notes on the Hidayah to make it accessible to students. And that since then, most copies of the Hidayah in the subcontinent, certainly, have been published with the notes of Imam Abdul Hayy al-Laknawi. And he was a genius and brilliant. Anyways, and then the most accurate of the four mutun of the Hanafi school is Kanzul Daqa'iq of Imam Hafizuddin Abu al-Barakat al-Nasafi, who died either in the year 706 or 711 or somewhere around there. The Hanafis didn't pay a lot of attention to the biographies of their own shuyukh because they're so busy with the fiqh. But, I'm not saying the different dates because I don't know the date, but the ulama differ on the dates of the death of Imam Abu. And you need to know, if you're a Hanafi talib al-ilm, there's a principle that know thy Nasafi. Because there are four Imam level Imam al-Nasafis, like who are of ummatic significance in the Hanafi madhab. Four Imam level Nasafis. I'm not going to go into their biographies. There are Imam Abu Hafs Najmuddin al-Nasafi and Imam Abu Mu'in al-Nasafi. I'll mention three, I'll be nice to you. And the number three is, so Abu Hafs al-Nasafi is the author of the Aqidah al-Nasafiyya, an author of a great tafsir, At-Taysir fi al-Tafsir, and many other books. Manzumat al-Khilaf, a poem in the difference of opinion within the school. Number two, the second Nasafi that we'll mention is Imam Abu Mu'in al-Nasafi, a great Hanafi theologian and jurist, etc. Number three is Imam Abu al-Barakat Hafizuddin al-Nasafi, the author of Kanz al-Daqa'iq and the author of what's famous as Tafsir al-Nasafi. Of course, there's at least three major Nasafis who have tafsirs. So someone asks you, which Tafsir al-Nasafi? If you don't know, I've run into students, now you study Tafsir al-Nasafi. That's which Nasafi, they don't know. Which Tafsir, they don't know the name. So you've read a book you don't know the name of? And that's being lazy. So Kanz al-Daqa'iq is the most precise of the four mutun of the madhab. It's called Kanz al-Daqa'iq because it's a treasure chest of subtleties. Sometimes just the way an issue is expressed brings out 3 or 4 opinions just by how you do the i'rab of the statement. Right? It's a marvel of marvels. And most of the greatest commentaries of the madhab, besides the Hidayah, were written on Kanz al-Daqa'iq. We'll just mention 2 of them, which are Tabyin al-Haqa'iq of Imam al-Zayla'i, and Zayla is in modern day Somalia modern day Somalia, and there's a great tradition of East African Hanafis. And the other of the greatest commentaries on the Kanz is Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq of Al-Najm ibn Nujaym. And of course, there are many other books. We'll just mention one other book that played a huge influence, a great 9th century Ottoman scholar, Mullah Khusro. Mullah Khusro, he compiled his own matan called Al-Ghurar, but a bit like the Hidayah, the commentary was so great that people paid attention to the commentary. He wrote a commentary called Ad-Durar. Ad-Durar. and that had a huge influence on everyone who came after in the madhab. Mullah Khusro was also a brilliant imam in usul al-fiqh. Was the first teacher at Aya Sophia. Rahimahullah ta'ala. It's called Ad-Durar. And then there are later references for fatwa, right? Of the most important of which is Imam al-Haskafi's Durr al-Mukhtar and Ibn Abdin's Radd al-Muhtar. Right? Imam al-Haskafi's Durr al-Mukhtar, and we'll share the biographical information of these. So Durr al-Mukhtar is a commentary on a matan in the Hanafi school called Tanweer al-Absar by Imam al-Tumurtashi. Al-Tumurtashi was a student of Ibn Nujaym. And Al-Tumurtashi based his work on a lot of them on the conclusions of his teacher, Ibn Nujaym. Al-Haskafi, who came after, in one place he criticizes very indirectly, politely, Imam al-Tumurtashi, that this is contrary to Ibn Nujaym and those who make taqleed of Ibn Nujaym. Because he's annoyed on a legal point, so he makes this passing thing. But it's a brilliant work, the Imam Tumurtashi's work, and Imam al-Haskafi, who was the Mufti of Damascus, late 11th century, he wrote this work, Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar. The matan, it's based on Tanweer al-Absar. The matan is based on Tanweer al-Absar, is basically Kanz al-Daqa'iq with influence from the Durar of Mullah Khusro and the conclusions of his teacher Ibn Nujaym in Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq. Right? So he compiled this matan called Tanweer al-Absar. And Imam al-Haskafi wrote the most important commentary for fatwa in the Hanafi school called Ad-Durr al-Mukhtar, the chosen pearl. The chosen pearl, why? Because he's saying that, okay, Mullah Khusro wrote a book called Ad-Durar, the pearls. But who needs the pearls when you have the one chosen pearl? Right? Right? And he also points in his opening that yes, you have the overwhelming ocean, Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq, but he says in reality my book is the ocean, but without shores. Right? And then the great early 13th century Hanafi Imam Muhammad Amin ibn Abidin took the Durr al-Mukhtar, which he said, I spent my nights and days with this book until I became its intimate companion. And it gave me permission to enter its private chamber and lifted from its beauty the veil. And it's like a love ode to the book, right? وَأَطْلَعَنِي عَلَى سِرِّهِ وَضَمِيرِهِ, and disclosed to me both its secret and open thoughts. And that is the central reference for fatwa in the Hanafi school. Now in this process, Imam Shurunbulali, the author of the work that we are studying, Nur al-Idah, who wrote a commentary on it, Imdad al-Fattah, and an abridgment called Maraq al-Falah. Imam Shurunbulali's Nur al-Idah had a great influence in terms of the legal opinions within the fiqh of worship. But Imam Shurunbulali also wrote a super commentary, a hashiyah on the Durar of Mullah Khusro. And that influenced the scholars who came after, amongst them Ibn Abidin in Radd al-Muhtar. So in this, and these names, inshallah, we'll share the list of each of these names with their death dates by next week, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So we're going to pause for Maghrib and then just close out the the opening, I just wanted to take this background on the background of the school, because you will hear the names of some of these books. So just to have a sense that they are the mutun of the school, right? Their primary purpose is to transmit the school. But sometimes the scholars are, those scholars are not infallible. Sometimes there's difference, because what someone deemed to be the position of Abu Hanifa, because Abu Hanifa's opinion would be determined either explicitly or by indication or implication, right? Sometimes Imam Quduri says this is Zahir Riwayah, but others said no, actually Zahir Riwayah is something else, right? And then we discussed that, right? The great commentaries of the school, and then these works of verification. Generally, the primary recourse for fatwa in the Hanafi school is Ibn Abdin's Radd al-Muhtar, right? Because he came much later. When did Ibn Abdin pass away? 1252 Hijri. So he is coming after this long process of verification. What distinguished Ibn Abdin is that coming at a time when fiqh became much weaker, and he was within the last 100 years or so of the Ottoman Empire, and there was turbulence going on, right? His son was part of an attempt to maintain Islamic law in the Ottoman lands through the Majalla. His son was part of the committee of the Majalla, Ala ad-Din Abidin. So he explicitly laid out the principles of fatwa in the Hanafi school, things that students would learn and scholars would learn through inculcation and long company of master fuqaha. But he laid them down very explicitly. And he defined that the legal method for choosing what are the strongest positions in the madhab, and then he followed those principles with amazing diligence and coherence and consistency, and also with great humility. Rahimahullah ta'ala. That's why he's referred to as Khatimatul Muhaqqiqeen, right? The seal of the scholars of verification, even though there are numerous opinions of Ibn Abdin that his own son and his principal students, like his nephew Abdul Ghani Abidin, or his great student, the author of Al-Lubab fi Sharh al-Kitab, Abdul Ghani al-Maydani, they didn't follow, because we don't make taqleed of anybody per se, right? Of the later scholars, we're following Imam Abu Hanifa, and the attempt and the following of these scholars is that this position, we are confident that this position best encapsulates the application of the way of Imam Abu Hanifa, which is a consistent, coherent way of following Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who have commanded فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. So we'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll just complete the opening of the author. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So, returning to our author, he says, he gives us the name of the text and makes a dua. So he says, Rahimahullah Ta'ala,
وسميته نور الإيضاح ونجاة الأرواح والله أسأل أن ينفع به عباده ويديم به الإفادة.
Ameen. So he said, I named it Nur al-Idah wa Najatul Arwah. And here, of course, the way you read the Arabic of a title can be in two ways. Because samma, the verb samma, generally takes two maf'uls, two objects, both of which are in nasb. I named A, B, right? So if you read it Arabically, it will be سميته نور الإيضاح ونجاة الأرواح. But you can also read it quoting the title على الحكاية, and that will be سميته نور الإيضاح سميته نور الإيضاح ونجاة الأرواح. And there, grammatically, it would be in a state of nasb, but you read it in rafa على الحكاية. And if you do that normally, you would have a very subtle pause. They سميته, if you read it connectedly, it would be سميته نور الإيضاح ونجاة الأرواح. But if you want to emphasize you're reading the title, it's a subtle thing in reading. You say سميته نور الإيضاح. Right? The more natural reading would be to read it with the i'rab. And the name, of course, indicates the purpose of the text. Right? That, beneficial knowledge is a light, as the Quran and Sunnah make clear. Light is that which shows things as they are. Right? So this is clarity. It's a light of clarification. Right? So the idah, clarification, أوضح يعني أوضح إيضاحا أوضح يوضح إيضاحا is from making something clear. So it's a light. So it's like a wasf kashif, because light makes things clear, but it's the light that makes things clear, right? And that's the role of beneficial knowledge, right? What does it make things clear? How to fulfill your duty in worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how to assist others in fulfilling their duty of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, that is the means, and what is the end? وَنَجَاةَ الْأَرْوَاحِ, and the salvation of souls. Because the foundation of salvation is fulfilling your existential purpose, which is وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Right? But this also conveys that his goal here is not merely theoretical. And that's one of the reasons where this text became so blessed, that its goal is, with its brilliance and accuracy, is full of nusх li'ibadillah, sincere concern for the servants of Allah. And it's palpably clear in the opening of Maraq al-Falah and the opening of Imdad al-Fattah as well. But it's also this concern that makes him sometimes not take the prevalent opinion amongst the later scholars. Right? Sometimes he won't take the prevalent opinion amongst later scholars due to what he deems to be more suitable. It's a sahih opinion, even if it's contrary to what most of the scholars have said asah. Sometimes Imam Shurunbulali chooses on the basis of what's more cautious. Sometimes on the basis of what he sees is more practicable. Sometimes he'll choose on the basis of strength of evidence. Generally, when he chooses on the or sometimes inclines on the basis of strength of evidence, he is frequently but not always following Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam, who did that frequently before him. And sometimes it is his own choice or inclination, right? And this is a minority of issues. But he indicates in the larger of the two commentaries that he'll do that when at least some of the scholars of the madhab have deemed that opinion to be sound. It's a small number of issues. We'll be pointing out some of them. Generally, there are followable opinions. There's very few issues in Nur al-Idah that are not per se sound within the madhab. Very small, subtle, rare issues. But you don't have to worry about that. And then, so you see here in the text, a manifestation of concern for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's servants. Right? Right? In the title itself, right? Now, to close out the introduction lesson, there are just three things that we wanted to leave the introduction and enter the Kitab al-Tahara with, right? Very briefly, the first of these is a reminder on sincerity. Right? A reminder on sincerity that al-ilm la yanfa bidun al-ikhlas. And one of the books that a Hanafi student should benefit from when it comes to the fiqh of hearts is Imam Abu Layth as-Samarqandi's work, Tanbihul Ghafilin, a reminder for the heedless. And he talks there about in the section on sincerity, on 7 elements related to sincerity. And inshallah, one of the brothers will be sharing a brief translation of that basically there's 7 things that don't benefit without 7 things. All of them relate to sincerity. So, amongst them is that fear does not benefit without commitment to change, right? Hope does not benefit without acting on what you're hoping for. Seeking forgiveness does not benefit without remorse. You keep saying, so someone, you just committed sin, you say astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. Say, do you regret it? Say, oh, I didn't think about that. Right? Right? Repentance does not benefit without the firm resolve to leave the sin. Likewise, effort in one's actions does not benefit without concern for soundness and sincerity. Right? فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. So whoever hopes for the meeting of their Lord, let them act. But that's not it. That's hope. Hope must be connected with action. Otherwise, it's wishful thinking. عَمَلًا صَالِحًا. Action with action that is right. And what is right action? Right action is ما كان ظاهره موافقا للسنة وباطنه محلا بالإخلاص. Right action, the ulama explain, is that which outwardly corresponds to the prophetic sunnah and inwardly is adorned with sincerity. But also to guard one's sincerity. ولا يشرك بعبادة ربه أحد. And associate none in their in their devotion to Allah. Why? Because you can start off with a sincere intent, but insincerity creeps in to one's actions. So that's the first thing. Guard your sincerity carefully. And we'll share a brief resource about that, about these 7 things to guard. The second is, remember what is beneficial knowledge, right? And Imam al-Ghazali talks about beneficial knowledge, and he gives a definition of beneficial knowledge in the beginning of guidance. It's actually his definition of the elements of beneficial knowledge in Beginning of Guidance is a more comprehensive summary than any summary that you'll find directly in the Ihya. That there's 8 elements to beneficial knowledge. Do you still have your notes on that? Yeah. So inshallah, we'll share the Arabic of that, but we'll just number it, the 8 elements. And they might be 7. Al-adad la mafhuma lahu. You can number them in different ways. But what is beneficial knowledge? Beneficial knowledge is knowledge that results in action. Right? That you seek it in order to act upon it. Imam Abu Hanifa said, ما فضل العلم إلا العمل به. The virtue of knowledge is only insofar as it is to be acted upon by you or by someone else. Right? Secondly, to sincerely seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the knowledge, and to seek the next life. To intend to benefit oneself and others from that knowledge. To lift ignorance from oneself and from others. Right? And ignorance is not a put down. Ignorance is simply not knowing what one should know. Right? And to lift ignorance from oneself and others. And to preserve the religion. To preserve the religion. For oneself and for others. And to call oneself and others to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And there's many other intentions. To revive the prophetic sunnah in one's life and others. And as a reminder to oneself and to others. Right? And to increase in clarity and confidence and certitude about the way of the Prophet ﷺ, about the straight path, to be able to act with excellence, right, etc. So there are many, many intentions, and these are some in a very summary fashion. They are found in the Niyatul Ilm of Imam al-Haddad, and we'll include this as a resource in this lesson. Here we have an article about that on Seekers, but also there's a beautiful book by Habib Saad al-Aidarus, who is a very noble scholar of Hadramaut from the Sad al-Ba'alawi, who wrote a beautiful book called Kitabun Niyat, the Book of Intentions, and this is translated into English. So we will share both the Arabic and the English of what should the intentions be in seeking knowledge. Right? And there are dozens of intentions that one can make. So the Arabic is online, and we'll share just that section. And he has actually at least 2 sections that relate to knowledge. One is not intentions of seeking knowledge in general, and the second is the intentions of attending a class of religious knowledge. So we'll share those as resources for the course. Inshallah, we should not share the whole book, although the PDF of the English is floating online. But we should just share that section and encourage people to get the book. And then, last thing, of course, we mentioned this already, but we'll just to reiterate that to benefit from a text like this, please prepare, right? And preparation should, if you're serious, should include writing out the text. Secondly, attend the class attentively. And a key to attentiveness is be ready with your questions and ask the questions as they arise. Thirdly, review thoroughly and strive to engage in group review. Right? Strive to engage in group review. Partner up with somebody, etc. And don't hesitate to post your questions on the forum as well if they arise. Very last thing, and this is a question that somebody asked earlier, that what text should one refer to? The most obvious text to refer to, particularly if you are a student of knowledge with exposure to Arabic, etc., is Maraq al-Falah. And inshallah, we'll be taking most of our explanation from the author himself, from his Maraq al-Falah. Now, if you're familiar with Arabic, if there's one other text that you would refer to in preparing, that would be Al-Hadiyatul Ala'iyya, which is Ala ad-Din Abidin, the son of Ibn Abdin, his gift for students of primary Quran schools. الهدية العلائية لتلاميذ المكاتب الابتدائية. But fuqaha would benefit from reading this book. But it is a nuanced presentation of the final conclusions of the madhab. He summarized it basically from his father's work in the chapters of worship, halal and haram, and beliefs. Al-Hadiyya al-Ala'iyya. And the third, this for more advanced students, is Hashiyat al-Tahtawi. You're not expected to prepare from it, etc. But if you have Hashiyat al-Tahtawi, you'll find benefit insofar as we'll be pointing to some things without going into detail there. So these are three of the works that are standard to refer to at this stage. But there's no merit in reading left and right. The most important thing is consolidate your core. Write out the text. Take notes from the class. Ask your questions, review. This is nafil. Nafil only benefits if you do the fard and the sunnah. The fard is prepare, attend attentively, review. Right? Writing out the text, diagramming key concepts, memorizing the text, memorizing definitions. Those are the sunnahs. You don't do the fard and sunnah mu'akkada. The nawafil are decorative elements. It's like putting on, is showing up to work in your pajamas, but you put on a really good tie. You didn't change your clothes though, right? So that's a bit foolish, right? So inshallah, put on your clothes and join us, properly. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, we'll be starting our second lesson from the book of purification. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He purify our resolve, our purpose, our intentions. He purify our aspirations. He purify our intentions, and that we sustain the state of purity, because that is what the religion is about, right? Safa'un wa la ma'un wa lutfun wa la hawa wa nurun wa la narun, right? That ultimately, the purification one seeks, right, is limpidity without water, and subtlety, lutfun wala hawa, and subtlety without wind, wa nurun wala narun, and light without fire, right? Wa ruhun wala jismu, and spirit without body, right? That is to be present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. تقدم كل الكائنات حديثها قديمة ولا شكل هناك ولا رسم, eternal, with no form there nor shape, right? But then Ibn al-Farid also says على نفسه فليبكي من ضاع عمره وليس له منها نصيب ولا سهم. Upon their own self let cry one who squandered their life and who has of it no share, no portion. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us both the relative purification of the outward and the true purification, that whose manifestation is to be present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. Any questions before we close for today? Go ahead. So that's why Sidi Zain will be sharing the list of these names, and we'll sort of try to put them into some kind of logical thing, and you could assist him, inshallah. Yeah. So it helps. So basically, it's like at a skeletal level, what does it help to know? That, here's Imam Abu Hanifa, right? So who came before Abu Hanifa, right? So before Abu Hanifa came his teacher. So we should know this chain from Abu Hanifa back to the Prophet ﷺ. The significant elements of it is his own teacher, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, who took from the students of Ibrahim al-Nakhai, who took from the students of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Then Abu Hanifa, main students, Abu Yusuf, Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, Zufar, Hassan ibn Ziyad al-Lu'lu'i. And there are many others, but you need to be familiar with these four, particularly Abu Yusuf and Muhammad ibn al-Hasan. Then there are the books of Zahir al-Riwayah. We'll share the names of the books of Zahir al-Riwayah. Then we can skip what happened between Zahir al-Riwayah and the four mutun. A lot happened between them, but that would be a complete study of the madhab. Then you have the four mutun, Quduri, Mukhtar, Wiqaya, Kenz. Right? Each of these has numerous commentaries, but for our purposes, we're going to look at the comment. And then, of course, there's the Hidayah of Imam al-Marghinani, which, though a commentary, serves as a matan. The great reference commentaries in the school are the commentaries of the later school. I mean, there's great commentaries up and down the madhab, right? Are the commentaries on the Hidayah and the commentaries on the Kanz. So list those four commentaries we mentioned on the Hidayah. If Uncle Zain wants to do Nafil, he'll share four others, but that could cloudy the air. The four others, you want to write them down? The four others being النهاية of السغناقي, معراج الدراية, غاية البيان, and السروجي. I've missed many out, but there's four other secondary main comments. I mentioned 4 or 5. نهاية, الغاية is of السروجي, غاية البيان of الإتقاني, and معراج الدراية, and I'll gift you, and there's the Kifaya. And make sure you get the right Kifaya in there, so that's 5. Of course, that's just a subset of numerous commentaries on the Hidayah. And then you have the great commentaries on Kanz al-Daqa'iq, which are numerous. Right? 2 most important that everyone needs to know: الزيلعيز, تبين الحقائق, and Ibn Nujaym's البحر الرائق. Then we mentioned the Durar of Mullah Khusro that played a very important role, on which Imam Shurunbulali wrote a hashia. So did many others, but we're sort of just looking at a skeletal flow. There's a lot more to the madhab than this. Then you have Dur al-Mukhtar of al-Haskafi, which is on Tanwir al-Absar of al-Tumurtashi. Upon that is Hashit ibn Abdin. Of course, the commentator on Maraq al-Falah, al-Tahtawi, also has a hashia on the Dur al-Mukhtar, and he was just before Ibn Abdin and contemporaneous, but senior to him in age, though Ibn Abdin is senior to him in rank in the madhab. And that is a little bit of an overview of the texts. And see Zain in his diagram, you could also include the Multaqa al-Abhur and its 2 commentaries. So you want to have him work a little bit, inshallah. The Multaqa al-Abhur by Ibrahim al-Halabi, which we're teaching on Wednesdays. He covers, and it's one of the level 3 classes, he joined the 4 mutun of the madhab, the 4 mutun that we mentioned. He combined them, added critical issues from the Hidayah of al-Marghinani, and also some of the key issues from another work called Majma' al-Bahrain of Ibn Sa'ati. Ibn Sa'ati joined between Quduri and a work called Manzumatul Khilaf of Abu Hafs al-Nasafi, with the poem and the difference of opinion within the madhab. He joined between them into a remarkable matan called Majma' al-Bahrain. And that was studied a lot amongst the later scholars. Ibn Sa'ati died 691 after the Hijrah. So he was a contemporary of Imam Nasafi's, but died before him. And so Multaqa al-Abhur just had was one of the most taught, or was probably the most taught fiqh book of an intermediate level in the Ottoman lands. Had many great commentaries on it. But we're not going to go into the details of those, but you can see them. So those are some of the most influential books in the Hanafi school. And those constitute the works that you'll hear referred to very often. And these things, you hear these great names, they say, لا تقل قد ذهبت أربابه. Don't say that those people are gone. إذ كل من سار على الدرب وصل. If for all who tread the well-trodden path can reach, right? So I say, I'm just trying to get this. No, the sunnah is, Allahumma inni as'aluka min al-khayri kulli. Oh Allah, I ask you for the good, all of it. عاجله وآجله ما علمت منه وما لم أعلم. It's immediate and it's long term. What I'm aware of it and what I'm not. Right? And that's what it takes. Right? Nasrullah subhanahu wa ta'ala taysir. Any other questions? Any of the onliners? If you do have questions, you can use the raise hands facility so we have a sense that you have any questions. Go ahead. Yeah, so what are the principles of fatwa in the school, etc.? So there are works on that. They would define them in the openings of books, etc., as Rasmul Mufti, the code to be followed by a mufti. And it's found in many, many books. Ibn Abdin summarized these and distilled them into a poem so people could remember it, called Uqud Rasm al-Mufti. Right? Uqud Rasm al-Mufti, and he wrote a commentary upon it. And that's studied upon completion of a core curriculum of studies by students. And there are a number of works on that, both in Arabic and particularly in Urdu, of varying quality. Any questions online? The onliners are surprisingly quiet. Go ahead. No. So there are different levels of fuqaha within the Hanafi school. Some broke it down into 8 levels. Others critique, like one of the great Ottoman scholars, Ibn Kamal Basha. He broke it down to 7, 8 levels. But others critique that classification. It was not so much the classification, but who he mentioned where. And then a number of other scholars, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi and Imam Abdul Hayy al-Laknawi and others, they presented what they felt were better classifications. And then there's a Central Asian scholar, Imam Shihab ad-Din al-Marjani, who tore into the classification entirely, making some good points, but also being blatantly unfair, particularly to the author of the classification, Ibn Kamal Basha. And there's others who've spoken about that classification of the different levels of the Mujtahid Imams. Some contentiously, like the great faqih of the early 20th century of Egypt, Imam Muhammad Bakhit al-Muti'i, who has some rather controversial things to say about the classification of the fuqaha of the madhab. And more soundly, perhaps, in Usul al-Ifta' of Mufti Taqi Usmani, there's a robust discussion of the issue. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala alam. But there are a clear sense that different scholars focused on different things. It's not just the classification of the fuqaha. The best explanation, it's by what role they played. It's not by the rank that you're a grade 88 faqih and you're a grade 91 faqih, so you know more than him. Some focused on certain areas, some focused on others. Right? So some chose between the positions of the Imams, others detailed out the madhab, others looked at the evidences for the different derivative positions within the madhab. So we're not so interested in classifying them theoretically, who's more learned than whom, but what is the critical role that the different fuqaha are playing. And that's how one cannot fully dismiss the classification of Ibn Kamal Basha, unlike particularly what some people state. But also there's a bad phenomenon of students of knowledge. They don't ask their teachers about anything they read. They read stuff and they don't consult about the soundness of what they're reading. So that the ulama classically would call such a person Hatibul Layl, the one who gathers firewood at night. So what happens if you gather firewood at night in the dark? You don't know what it is, right? You don't know whether you picked up firewood or excrement, right? Like just pick something up, seems solid, right? You don't know whether it's wet or dry, right? So they say, فَلَا يُمَيِّزْ بَيْنَ الرَّطْبِ وَالْيَابِسِ. You can't distinguish between moist and dry wood. وَلَا الْغَثِّ وَالسَّمِينِ. Nor between worthy wood and just, like some things you just have, it looks like wood, but it's just the bark. There's no actual wood behind it. Like the bark fell off. Someone hit into dry bark, so it fell, so you think you're picking up wood, but it's just bark. If you've gone camping, you can tell. Go ahead. What is your take on the ijtihadi rank of Imam Shurunbulali? That's a good question. I mean, the fuqaha refer to him as faqihun nafs. And it is clear from Nur al-Idah itself as a matan and its two commentaries that he does exercise ijtihad within the madhab in choosing between the strength of evidence of Imam Abu Hanifa and his companions on a number of issues. But he's also very cautious about that. Right? He's very cautious on a number of points. He inclines towards the strength of an opinion, and he keeps inclining towards it, sometimes multiple places within the Maraqi, Imdad al-Fatah, but he doesn't necessarily fully commit. But on some issues, he does choose. That's why there are many opinions within Maraqi al-Falah where he chooses the position of the Sahibain and those who came after. And even often when the majority of the later scholars didn't agree. Just cite two opinions really quickly before I hand over to Ustad Abdullah's class. One is the issue of what is the fatwa position on the time of Asr, where he very strongly inclines towards the position of the Sahibain of the early Asr time, very clearly, both in Nur al-Idah and in Maraq al-Sa'adat, etc. And a number of other such opinions, like what does the follower say when rising from ruku', etc. There's a number of opinions, and these are nuances, but he does take these positions. But at the same time, it's very important for students of knowledge to appreciate the degree of caution he has in taking a stance. Sometimes one follows one stance, but he's very careful about it. Even though on some issues where the later scholars before him, like Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam, chose a certain opinion, and the majority of the later scholars followed, like what is the ruling of rising from ruku'? Right? He very strongly inclines towards that, but he doesn't fully take the stance. And that's also, you see this quality of taqwa and humility in someone who the scholars after him called faqihun nafs, which indicates a degree of ijtihad. And as one of the biographers of Shurunbulali calls him, ahsanul mutaakhirin, the most knowledgeable of the later scholars. But they have this caution, that caution about taking an unequivocal stand, right? And that's also that sincerity. Sometimes, and we won't be able to unpack it fully here, but sometimes within Nur al-Idah, Imdad al-Fattah, and the Maraqi, Imam Shurunbulali has at least 3 opinions on an issue. And sometimes he actually changes his opinion later in some of his post Nur al-Idah and Maraqi writings, like his small treatise on the conditions and integrals of prayer. So, and that's the nature of fiqh, but he's clearly one of the very respected late scholars. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And sorry